Michael Landon stood in the dusty streets of Walnut Grove, directing what he didn't know would be his final episode. The man who created one of television's most beloved shows had kept a secret from everyone on set. In just months, he would be gone. But before that happened, he filmed an ending so emotional, so raw, that even the cast didn't understand what they were really making. This is the story of why that last episode became impossible to watch. Michael Landon wasn't supposed to become a legend. He was supposed to be a high school math teacher in New Jersey. But in 1959, at just 21 years old, he landed a role on a western called Bonanza, and everything changed. For 14 years, he played Little Joe Cartwright. Millions of people watched him grow up on television. Then, in 1974, he made a bold decision. He left that show to create something entirely new. Little House on the Prairie premiered on September 11, 1974. Nobody expected it to last more than a season. Networks said audiences didn't want family stories anymore. They wanted action. They wanted violence. They wanted anything except a show about pioneers struggling to survive on the frontier. But Landon believed in something different. He believed in stories about real people facing real problems. The show became a phenomenon. For 9 seasons, it dominated television. Children watched it. Parents watched it. Grandparents watched it. Landon didn't just star in the show, he directed most of the episodes. He controlled the vision. He shaped every moment. He became obsessed with telling stories that meant something. Stories about hardship, family, loss, and love. By 1982, Little House had won 13 Emmy Awards. Landon was wealthy. He was respected. He could do anything he wanted. But something was changing inside him. He was tired. Not physically tired. Spiritually tired. He started talking about ending the show while it was still loved, while it still meant something, before it became stale and forgotten. On May 10, 1983, the final episode aired. It was called The Last Farewell. But what Landon didn't tell anyone was why he really decided to end it. The real reason wasn't about ratings or creative exhaustion. It was something much darker. Something that would haunt everyone involved. But what he was hiding changed everything about that final episode. During the filming of the final season, Michael Landon noticed something wrong. He felt tired in ways he couldn't explain. His energy was fading. He pushed through it. He always pushed through everything. That was who he was, a man who never stopped, never complained, never showed weakness. But by early 1983, he couldn't ignore it anymore. He went to his doctor. The tests came back. The diagnosis was stage 3 pancreatic cancer. He was 54 years old. The doctors told him he had months to live, maybe a year if he was lucky. Landon made an immediate decision. He would tell nobody. Not the network. Not the producers. Not even most of the cast. He would finish the show as if nothing was wrong. Think about that for a moment. While directing some of the most emotionally intense scenes of the series, while comforting young actors and guiding their performances, Michael Landon was silently dying. He was filming farewell episodes while facing his own farewell. Nobody on set had any idea. Melissa Gilbert, who played Laura Ingalls, was just a teenager. She remembered Landon being present and focused, exactly as he always was. But looking back years later, she realized something was different. He seemed more emotional during certain scenes. He lingered longer on moments of connection between characters. He kept asking for extra takes on scenes about family and saying goodbye. The cast thought he was simply being a perfectionist. The truth was far more painful. Landon was saying goodbye to everyone without them knowing it. Every direction he gave, every scene he filmed, every moment he shared with the actors, it was all happening under a shadow he carried alone. His wife knew. His closest friends knew. But he swore them to secrecy. He didn't want pity. He didn't want the show to become about his illness. He wanted Little House to remain what it had always been, a story about people overcoming hardship with grace and family love. But keeping the secret took a toll that nobody could have predicted. The final episode of Little House on the Prairie wasn't a typical goodbye. Landon didn't want a sentimental farewell where everyone hugged and cried. That wasn't authentic to the show. Instead, he created something more powerful and, unknowingly, more heartbreaking. The Last Farewell is actually 2 episodes that aired as a 2-hour finale. In it, the entire town of Walnut Grove is forced to leave. A railroad company wants to buy the land. The residents refuse to sell. But the company is more powerful than they are. Slowly, inevitably, everyone must abandon their homes and move away. Families separate. The community dissolves. Everything they built crumbles. It's a story about loss. About saying goodbye to a place you love. About accepting that sometimes life doesn't give you choices. You simply have to let go and move forward. Every cast member later said filming those episodes was emotionally devastating. They cried between takes. They struggled to remember their lines. Barbara Walters, who directed some scenes, said the sadness on set was overwhelming. But nobody understood why Landon pushed so hard for such a dark, melancholic ending. Why didn't he choose something lighter? Why didn't he want the show to end with hope and new beginnings instead of loss and abandonment? The answer was sitting right there in front of them, and they couldn't see it. Landon was directing his own goodbye. He was filming his own farewell. Every scene about loss was filtered through his knowledge that he was losing everything: his health, his future, the show he loved. When characters spoke about saying goodbye to Walnut Grove forever, Landon knew he was saying goodbye to everything. The most devastating moment comes when Jack, the dog, has to be left behind because there's no room in the wagon. The family must abandon their beloved pet. Landon filmed that scene with such intensity, such raw emotion, that the young actors couldn't understand where it was coming from. He made them do take after take after take. Years later, they realized what he was actually filming. He wasn't just directing actors. He was processing his own mortality. He was working through his own fears about leaving behind the people and things he loved. What happened when people finally learned the truth devastated them all over again. On May 10, 1983, The Last Farewell aired to massive ratings. Millions of people watched the show end. Letters poured in from viewers who were heartbroken, moved, and grateful for 9 seasons of storytelling. Critics praised the finale as one of the greatest endings in television history. They called it bold. They called it artistic. They called it perfect. Nobody knew it was a dying man's masterpiece. Michael Landon kept his cancer diagnosis secret for several more months. He continued working. He continued directing. He continued living as normally as possible. But in April 1984, just before he would have turned 55, he finally decided to go public. He held a press conference and told the world he had pancreatic cancer. The shock was immediate and overwhelming. Suddenly, everything changed. Suddenly, people understood. Suddenly, they rewatched The Last Farewell with completely different eyes. The scenes that had moved them before now devastated them in entirely new ways. The dialogue that seemed poetic now seemed prophetic. The ending that felt artistic now felt like a man saying goodbye to his own life. Landon gave interviews from his hospital bed. He talked about his diagnosis with remarkable grace and honesty. He didn't ask for pity. He didn't rage against his fate. He spoke about his family, his faith, and his gratitude for the life he'd lived. He talked about Little House on the Prairie with deep love and pride. He said the show had given him everything. But there was something else in his voice during those final interviews. A recognition. A knowledge that he had filmed his own ending without anyone realizing it. He had directed the goodbye he would never get to direct in real life. He had told the story of loss and acceptance through his characters because he was living it himself. On July 1, 1991, Michael Landon died. He was 54 years old. He had survived longer than doctors predicted, but not by much. In his final days, he was surrounded by his family. His wife read to him. His children held his hand. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes talking about the show, sometimes talking about Walnut Grove as if it were real. The world mourned, but the real pain came when people finally understood what they had witnessed. Melissa Gilbert was devastated when she learned the truth. She had worked alongside Michael Landon for years as a young actress. She had watched him direct with passion and precision. She had never suspected anything was wrong. But after his death, when she rewatched those final episodes, everything looked different. She saw the extra takes. She saw the lingering moments. She saw how often he focused on scenes about family saying goodbye. She remembered his intensity during the most emotional moments. She understood, finally, that he had been teaching them how to say goodbye. Not just as actors playing characters, but as human beings learning to accept loss. Karen Grassel, who played Caroline Ingalls, gave an interview years later where she described filming the finale. She talked about how Landon seemed different. More present. More intentional. She had attributed it to his desire to end the show perfectly. She didn't know he was using the show as a way to process his own ending. Victor French, who played Isaiah Edwards and appeared in many episodes, was one of the few people who knew about Landon's diagnosis while filming. French later said it was the most difficult secret he'd ever kept. He watched Landon work through pain and exhaustion. He saw the strength it took to show up every day and create something beautiful while knowing his time was running out. The cast felt guilty. They felt sad. But mostly, they felt honored. They realized they had been part of something sacred. They had participated in a man's final act of storytelling. Every scene they filmed with Landon in his last months was a gift wrapped in pain. Melissa Sue Anderson, who played Mary Ingalls, wrote about her experience years later. She described Landon's kindness to the younger actors. How he would pull them aside and give them advice about life, about perseverance, about finding meaning in struggle. She wondered if he was trying to prepare them for something. If he was leaving them with lessons he wanted them to carry forward. The most heartbreaking realization came when they understood that Landon had deliberately chosen an ending about loss and separation. He could have ended the show with triumph. He could have given the characters a happy ending. Instead, he gave them something more honest. Something more real. He gave them an ending that reflected the human experience of saying goodbye to people and places we love. That's what made the final episode so hard to watch. But there was something else about those episodes that haunted people even more. Years passed. Decades passed. Little House on the Prairie became a classic. New generations discovered it. Parents showed it to their children. But whenever people reached the final episode, something happened. They couldn't finish it. Or if they did finish it, they found themselves crying in ways they didn't expect. Online communities formed where fans discussed the finale. Many people said they had watched the show multiple times but could never bring themselves to watch The Last Farewell again. It was too painful. Not because of what happened in the story, but because of what they now knew happened behind the scenes. Some viewers reported feeling physically ill while watching Landon direct those final scenes. Knowing that he was dying made every moment feel unbearable. The fictional loss in the show became intertwined with the real loss happening in real life. It was impossible to separate the two. One fan wrote online that she tried to show the finale to her daughter. She made it through the first 20 minutes before she had to leave the room. The sadness was overwhelming. It wasn't just sadness about Walnut Grove disappearing. It was sadness about Michael Landon directing his own goodbye without anyone knowing. It was sadness about a man using his art to process his mortality. Teachers who used Little House in classrooms reported that students would become unexpectedly emotional during the final episodes. When they explained the context about Landon's illness, the students understood immediately. They recognized that they weren't just watching a television show. They were watching a man say goodbye. The finale has been called one of the most emotionally powerful television moments ever created. But not because of the acting or the writing, though both are excellent. It's powerful because it's real in a way that most television never is. It's a man facing his own death, channeling that experience into art, and sharing it with millions of people without them knowing the truth. Landon's children have spoken about how the finale represents their father's philosophy. He believed that endings mattered. He believed that how you say goodbye defines how people remember you. He wanted to end Little House on the Prairie with honesty and grace, the same way he wanted to face his own ending. When you watched The Last Farewell, knowing what you now know, it becomes something sacred. It becomes a man's final gift to the world. Every direction Landon gave was a choice. Every scene he filmed was intentional. Every moment was infused with the knowledge that his time was running out. That's why fans still can't watch it. That's why it remains hard to watch. Because it's not just a television episode. It's a testament to a man who loved his craft so much that he used it to teach the world how to say goodbye with dignity, with love, and with hope. But the story of Michael Landon doesn't end with his death. It continues in ways most people never realized. Michael Landon died on July 1, 1991, but his final episode continued to teach lessons long after he was gone. The show became more than entertainment. It became a masterclass in how to say goodbye. How to face loss with grace. How to leave a legacy that mattered. In the years following his death, Little House on the Prairie experienced a resurgence. A new generation discovered it. Older fans rewatched it with fresh understanding. Every time someone discovered the truth about that final episode, they experienced a moment of profound realization. They understood that they had been watching art created by someone consciously facing his own mortality. Landon's children became stewards of his legacy. They have spoken openly about their father's courage during his illness. They've talked about how he never complained. How he remained focused on his work and his family. How he lived his final months with the same intention and passion he brought to everything else. The cast of Little House remained forever changed by their experience. Many of them credited Landon with teaching them something essential about the craft of acting. Not just technique, but purpose. He showed them that acting wasn't about entertainment. It was about truth. It was about connecting human to human through shared emotion and experience. Years later, when tributes to Landon aired, clips from the finale were featured repeatedly. People watched that final episode again and again, this time understanding its true meaning. Critics who had praised it for its artistry now praised it for its humanity. They recognized that Landon had created something that transcended television. He had created a record of a man processing his own ending. The show's themes took on new resonance. Stories about family became more precious. Scenes about loss became more meaningful. Dialogue about perseverance became more inspiring. Everything Landon had created was filtered through the lens of what people now knew about his life. In interviews, Melissa Gilbert spoke about what Landon taught her. She talked about his generosity as a director, his patience with actors, his belief that television could be more than escapism. He showed her that art could matter, that stories could heal, that how you leave the world is just as important as how you live in it. Michael Landon's final episode on Little House on the Prairie remains one of television's most watched and most emotionally powerful moments. But it's powerful not just because of what's on screen. It's powerful because of what was happening behind the camera. A man using his art as a way to say goodbye. A director filming his own farewell. A storyteller ensuring that his final story would be one people never forgot. When you watch The Last Farewell today, you're watching more than a television episode. You're watching a man's final act of love. Love for his craft. Love for his cast and crew. Love for the millions of people who invited him into their homes every week. He didn't want to leave them with sadness. He wanted to leave them with meaning. With understanding. With the knowledge that even in loss, there is grace. That's the real story of Michael Landon's final episode. It's not just hard to watch because it's sad. It's hard to watch because it's true. Because it's real. Because somewhere in those scenes about saying goodbye to Walnut Grove, Michael Landon was saying goodbye to life itself. And he did it with such beauty, such dignity, such love, that we're still watching it, still learning from it, still being changed by it. Many people watching have faced moments where they had to say goodbye to something they loved. If you've ever stood at an ending you weren't ready for, you're not alone. Michael Landon understood that feeling. He lived it while creating art about it. If you found this story moving, please subscribe because the next story on this channel reveals another Hollywood secret that changed television forever. Something most people have never heard about. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering Michael Landon. And thank you for understanding that sometimes the most powerful art comes from the most painful places.